Welcome to Sister Power. I'm Sharon Thomas Yarbrough. We are acknowledging and honoring the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and African Americans, victims of white terrorism and violence of yesterday and today. Sister Power is a safe space to speak your truth. We are here to encourage and foster unity and empowerment. Welcome, guests. Welcome, Sequoia, Crystal, Kathryn. Welcome to Sister Power.
Aloha.
Hello. Mahalo.
Mahalo to you, too. You know, this is such an important subject, reimagining unity and stop the Asian and Black and Brown hate. So, Crystal, I want to start with you. Your film, Unruly Chinese Women, research states that Chinese immigration and African American enslavement, disenfranchisement history are connected. Chinese arrived on their own fruition, and African Americans were forced. How do the two cultural histories connect?
Okay, thank you for that, Sharon, and thank you for giving us this space to talk. This is the problem with our history is we compartmentalize everything, assuming that there is no connection, but we're all connected and interwoven. And so in my research, just to give you a recap of what I'm doing is I'm exploring the Chinese who grew up in the Black neighborhood of Augusta, Georgia during segregation. This is Jim Crow period. So in exploring, through my grandmother's story, growing up there in the heart of the Black neighborhood, running a Chinese grocery store, right? This is something that happens now. You've got like a lot of Asians opening up grocery stores and having these tensions or solidarity between Asians and African Americans. And so my research really wants to create the awareness that we are in fact connected. And historically speaking, during that time in plantation era, when the white people decided to say, okay, well, we're not doing this anymore, you guys are on your own, and they had these commissaries, right? And nobody wanted to do business with the Black people, honestly. And so the Chinese were coming in and they were trying to work hard and get their way into society. And they decided to say, okay, well, why don't we open up some grocery stores in the Black neighborhood? And then it became a thing. So by doing this, it becomes a very interesting and problematic relationship. Because on one hand, yes, there is a solidarity. There's these two marginal groups coming together in this very specific space and time. And at the same time, no, the Chinese were not quite as oppressed as Blacks, right? They were the middle ground, the model minority, which we can unpack a little bit more later. And how this is relevant to today's violence is because creating tensions based on the hierarchy of which groups placed where on the color line is something so troubling and so revealing of what our history and our country is built on that it's troubling. It's just, I don't even with today and with the new eruptions of violence, I can't tell you how much we need to talk about our past and understanding each other's history and how they're blended in order to reckon with how we should be continuing and opening up these conversations. I don't know if that answered your question, but I feel like it's all related. Yeah.
Absolutely, it answered. I mean, you just took us to, especially with coming into the Black neighborhood, the African American neighborhood, the Chinese, and where we were not able to have our own businesses there. So Sequoia, I think she can touch on it more. Why is there tension between the AAPI and African Americans, and what are the origins of anti-Blackness in America?
Oh, so that's as Crystal had inferred, it ties in with a bit of the model minority myth. Also, there's elements of maybe animus amongst African Americans in that they cannot start their own businesses in the community, or they're shut out from trying to, be entrepreneurial and raise up And then you have, under that model minority myth, some within the community start to support white supremacy, which is used to divide us all. It's a con. We're all being played in this, and that there's this hierarchy that Crystal mentioned, right? That usually AAPI are stuck in between the white and the Black community, right? And so there's this sense of colorism, right? And so there's this anti-Blackness element, which African Americans also have issues with colorism. So we're all been affected by it, right? And it's this indoctrination, this socialization that's all a con. It's all used to keep us divided, where we need to be more united. And so over the years, all of this is compounded, and even our educational system, our history, our American history books, they do not talk about the AAPI nor African American experience. It's all Eurocentrically male based, right? And we can thank the Daughters of the Revolution, for the Confederacy, excuse me, for that, right? They have total control over our textbooks. So we don't get to understand and know one another's history. So, I mean, as far back as in terms of solidarity with African Americans and Asians, we go way back to Frederick Douglass. You know, he totally supported Chinese immigration in the 1890s, and with the Chinese immigration, and then even opposed the Chinese Exclusion Act. Was that 1882, I think, sometime in there. And then all up into, like, you've got like the Scott Act, the Gary Act, all these anti-Asian kind of acts that were coming up well into like the early 1920s. And then that overlaps with the Jim Crow. So just as Crystal mentions with her film, there's this close proximity to one another, but yet there's animus and tension, because although we're all people of color and dealing with this Jim Crow, I mean, everybody was lynched. If you're not white, you're lynched, right? For basically progressing or being of color. So over the years, all of this is built up. And I think the main part of it is that colorism, which affects both communities. And that's something that we all need to own up to and move past.
Absolutely. You know, we have to stop making excuses for white violence, for one thing. And Kathryn, I want to come to you. How can the people of color community unify to support each other in addressing inequality and systemic racism?
Well, in my experience, I think that it's been very easy to do. I think it's a matter of establishing connection and bonds and friendship, sincere friendship. And within our communities, our different communities, we have a common enemy. So it's easier to do than most other problems. In my experience, like, I started in college. I went to school at Bard College back when Chinua Achebe was a visiting scholar. And it was during the Rodney King beatings, and when the Latino students at UCLA took over their administration building in protest of being marginalized in education, we threw our own revolution on campus. And the administration, which was very, very conservative, Jewish, white, tried to separate us, tried to make it either a Black issue, a Latina issue, an Asian issue. They could not handle when we all came together and you had the African American kids saying, well, what about Asian studies? You had the Asian kids saying, what about Native studies? You had the Native kids saying, what about Hispanic, Latino studies? And it was great. And the administration, the powers that be in our world of college, didn't know what to do and how to handle it. We had teachers coming up to us saying, I haven't seen this kind of unity since the 60s. And I'm like, well, there's a reason for that, because it's effective. And when I see language being used in media, especially mass media, to identify and describe a tragedy like this Asian hate, Stop Asian Hate campaign. Well, I think the real issue is reminding everybody, yeah, it's hate directed towards the Asian community, but it's not an Asian problem, it's a white supremacy problem. And that's something everybody can get behind. And it's very refreshing, empowering, and a feeling of warmth when you see your brethren of various colors fighting for your issue, and you feel trust bond developing, and then you do the same. It's the start of something beautiful and something that lasts, because you make lifelong friends. The people that I threw that revolution with on Bard campus, which forced the administration to enter in a new major for multicultural ethnic studies during the time when students were taking over buildings and getting beaten and throwing, riots and stuff. We did it peacefully. Because Chinua Achebe sat down with us. Well, he was confined to a wheelchair, but he sat down with us and said, if you take over a building, you will lose. And so we were like, okay. We gave the keys back. We threw away the blueprints, and we just rethought our whole attempt. And he said, what you guys are doing is good. Keep going, but don't take over a building. Because violence just begets more violence.
Yeah.
And it's hard to not give in sometimes when you see your friends on the front line getting hurt and dragged away unconstitutionally by police who are supposed to protect the entire community, but only protect one part of the community. But it's worth it in the long run. And the friends and coworkers that I've made in this fight for equality are my lifelong friends, and I'm so grateful for them.
I am too. I saw this poster, Kathryn and Chris Sequoia, Asians are not a virus and Blacks are not a threat. I just think that if people need to resonate with this. And so, Crystal, I'm going to come to you. Let's discuss how the media and film industry have distorted and perpetuated images of Asian females as sexualized objects.
Yeah. No, we need to talk about that. And it's not just media; it's history, because you can't think about it. All the stuff that's going on is all rooted in immigration policies, in militarism and colonialism, right? During the Korean War, when the American soldiers were based there, and then that perpetuated this kind of sexuality, this sexualization of Asian women there, and then I lived in Hong Kong for many years, and even there, I sometimes, because I'm dark skinned, would be seen as like the dirty weekend when I used to go with my husband to Thailand or the Philippines for a weekend. They like saw me as this sexualized object. And it didn't matter if you hold an American passport or what, they see you as this object. And this goes back to not just film, but if we're going to talk about film and representation here, where do we start? Since day one, we've had this kind of this either the sexualized object, the hypersexualized object, if I say, or the evil woman, and it's just so binary, and it's sad that it hasn't shifted, and even it takes today the deaths of women to have an awakening to something that's been going on for many years. But the idea of yellow fever, you've heard that term before, but there are, you go to Asia, even here, people have this concept of the Asian woman and the sexualization. But I'll tell you something, it even goes back to within Chinese culture, because in Chinese Confucian values, there is that sense of being quiet and obedient and submissive in a way that is an attribute for the proper Chinese woman, right? And somehow this kind of gets muddled into the impression that Westerners want to believe about the Asian woman being this passive, submissive doll, this exotic doll. And so it is hugely problematic. And by understanding histories again, this is where we open up that uncomfortable conversation about how to reshift the lens. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Black woman, is looked at as a sex object as well.
Thank you for saying that, because I wanted to say there's a parallel between this
Yes.
objectification of the Black woman's body and the Asian woman's. Yes.
Absolutely. And the Black man. I mean, he's looked at as a sexual object as well. So, Sequoia,
Yes.
are there coalitions between African American and Asian Pacific Islanders communities today?
Oh, there are a number. Well, just kind of take it back a little bit in history. We had, I mentioned Frederick Douglass, but there was also during the World War II, right, with the Japanese internment, African Americans, NAACP, which are they've been constant throughout. You know, it's not just about African Americans; they are for all people of color in particular. But they they opposed these basically concentration camps and brought supplies and things to Japanese Americans who were dealing with that, and cited the hypocrisy of it, where you didn't have German nor Italian Americans having to be interned. Uh, so it goes, you know, you jump from Frederick Douglass to the 1800s, and then you go to and all through Jim Crow era, and then you got World War II of African Americans stepping up to be in solidarity. And then it comes to the 60s, 1960s, with the Black Power movement, Civil Rights movement, same thing. And NAACP is there. We had women, strong women like Ina Sugihara of her Congress of Racial Equity, who modeled her work off of the Civil Rights movement, and greatly appreciated the fight that African Americans have done to open the door for Asian AAPI immigrants to come to this nation, and, you know, live the dream. And you have Yuri Kochiyama, who was Malcolm X's dear friend for many years, and getting kind of tying in the whole how we don't know, we're disinformed about our history. The pictures always cropped around the assassination of our brother Malcolm, where Yuri's is cut out, but she was holding his head when he was killed, you know, in that ballroom. But they cropped that out again, pushing that narrative that there's this divisiveness, you know, that, you know, Asians are the model minority, like there's got to be subdued and all, they wouldn't be a part of that, can't stand out, you know, and that you know, it's only the Black people out there making all of this noise. So, but you bring it up to today, and you have various organizations like the, you know, Stop Hate, Stop AAPI Hate, and that's at .org. And then you also have coalitions like the Survivors of Gender-Based Violence at IamWomankind.org, and they kind of bring the whole fused Black and Asian AAPI together. Also, Asian American Writers Workshop, that's a really strong one, and they are at aaww.org. And then our last one would be the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, and they are at rain.org. And they have in their website, they have an element of bystander. What do bystanders do when they witness hate, oppression, someone beating someone down? What can you do? So we've got.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that information. It's so needed. You know, Kathryn, in the past, you have strongly advocated dismantling fetishization and sexual exploitation of women and girls. Elaborate on the topic of how women of color are negatively impacted by the media.
Yeah, well, not just the media, the entire justice system and social service system as well, where you have in these systems people who are control of these systems categorically white or fair skin, and those that they purport to support and serve predominantly of color and poor or struggling. And as far as the exploitation of women and girls, forget about it. what happens as far as the value structure is completely different from what has been talked about in mainstream America. So what I'm saying is, in human trafficking, sex trafficking, the darker you are, the higher a value you are. The darker and younger you are, the more you command as far as a price. And I'm talking about sexual slavery. For Johns who are predominantly white, Asian, and wealthy, military, and it's kind of a testament to our society, our global society, which is patriarchal. It's back to that same old paradigm that this is a logical result of patriarchal systems. It's not an aberration, it's a fact. And it's a consequence of these societies. And unless we dismantle patriarchal systems, we will always have some sort of slavery as a consequential result of patriarchy plus capitalism. And as far as unifying against these types, I see the world coming to a head, albeit slowly, because this is a generational kind of battle. But these issues of patriarchy, sexism, and race and white supremacy are globalized now. And the information that we have learned throughout the ages is only coming to a head faster as the resources available to our different global communities are being depleted. So with our societies subsisting on this idea of scarcity, like, oh, we're running out of stuff, then you will see more fomenting of racial tensions, sexism, homophobia, because everybody's vying for that front line to get a handout and batting down anybody and everybody, obliterating any chances of alliances to dismantle the patriarchy and the oppression globally. Because of this idea that we've learned that subsists on scarcity theory. When we know that nature, if you just know and are connected to nature, nature produces things in abundance. And a very, very well-known local gardener told me that. And unless you actually are connected to the land, have planted something, cared for it, do you really understand that that is the norm, not scarcity? And we are all invested, no matter what color or gender or sexuality, with the responsibility of sustaining that norm of nature providing in abundance. And then our whole global perspective will change from scarcity to sharing, sharing that abundance and sustaining it. And that's one thing that I've learned throughout the years from those who've come before us, Sonia Sanchez, Winona LaDuke, and all of those wonderful fighters from various cultures. And I think that's something to look forward to. Whether or not we want to go there or we're going to be forced there, that is what I see as the end result.
Love it. Happiness is something to look forward to. You know, Crystal, it is true, the media and film industry distorts and disinforms audiences about AAPI and POC. What kinds of tropes are deployed to disinform us? And has it affected you personally?
What kind of what? Sorry. What kind of
Tropes.
tropes? Oh,
Tropes.
okay.
Yes, tropes.
Oh, well, you know, in our very limited time, I think it's too hard to unpack the specifics. But what I do want to say, because I also want to give time for everyone to do some closing statement, is to pull off of Kathryn's metaphor of of nature, in that we're rooted, but underneath the roots, we're all kind of intertwined, right? So we're like entangled. And I wanted to have us feeling like recognizing this entanglement will help us to get out of these stereotypes, because it gives us a deeper perspective and a more complex understanding. And more importantly, because of the space of us being women here, I think we need to decenter the dominant narrative, give space for women's voices, because women offer a very different way of knowing. And that's why I kind of explore that back in my film too, is to empower women, like your show, Sharon, is embracing women's voices and accessing very alternative ways to bring us deeper insights into the world around us. And we need to do that in order to dismantle this white power. Thank you.
Very well
Amen. Yes.
said. Amen. It's true.
Yeah, loving it. Loving
Yes.
it.
Sequoia,
Mm.
are there any organizations actively working on healing the rift between our communities?
There's a few amongst yourself, Sisters Empowering Hawaii. We have one called the Asian American Feminist Collective. And that's at aaww.org, Project Black Asian Feminist Solidarities. It's a wonderful one to check out. And then we have Good Eats. That's founded by Tommy Wong and former Black Panther Party member Tarika Lewis. And that's at goodgoodEats.com. And eats with the EATZ. But I also wanted to close real quickly and say that jive on that same idea of women in the earth and planting. We should, our unity gardens, if you will, get that started, have a little revolution, right? And in terms of that entwinement that Crystal mentioned, of united minorities, there's nothing minor about us, join together to create the new majority. And then it's all over, right?
Yeah, woohoo!
To dismantle white supremacy, all united, all right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Kathryn, how can we better support each other, within a society based on scarcity theories?
Oh, well, I think we have opportunities every day to speak out, be present, and join our brethren and sisters to fight the good fight, no matter how microcosmic the issue is. It could be like fighting for a parking stall or changing lanes on the freeway, to advocating for policy change, or going to a march at the Capitol. We should be there with our brothers and sisters of all walks of life, so that they see us representing them. It's not just about us, it's about them. And what are we doing to give back to our fellow marchers of whatever issue is out there? Because all of these issues are intertwined. They are. And it's just a matter of time until we realize that.
Yeah. Thank you. Ladies, thank you. You were talking about Sequoia Sisters Empowering Hawaii. We honored Kathryn and Maya Satora Ing and Leslie Matthews at Women Making History. So there is an organization that's bringing us together. But in closing, if all the minorities united, we would be the majority. I'm Sharon Thomas Yarbrough. Thank you for spending your time with us with Sister Power. Aloha.